So Toy Story is a thing. Actually, it's 4 things, and in this case, I'm going to be looking at all 4 of them. But, I can't help but give the usual warnings and rantings about Disney making great content, but slowly taking over the movie and television world. Heterotopias are a thing, you know. But to Janglez, don't you pick the topics? Why do you keep coming back to Disney? Because despite slowly taking over how stories are told and who tells them, Disney still makes popular and well thought out movies. For the most part. But their animated movies are always top-notch, and despite being a separate studio for a long time, Pixar managed to set the standard for great computer animation and storytelling. Again, for the most part. And Toy Story has been the backbone of that studio's success right from the get-go. I have this theory that whenever Pixar is struggling, they just figure out how to do more Toy Story because that shit works. I have a weird relationship with Toy Story. When I first saw the movie, I really did not care for it. As a child, I had a hard time connecting with Woody as a main character because of his selfishness and poor decision making.
You are a sad, strange little man.
Also, Sid's dog is all janky when it moves, and that still kind of weirds me out. Yuck. Because of my aversion to this movie, I was not particularly interested in Toy Story 2, and so I basically ignored its release. Same goes for 3. Until a few years after, a friend of mine sat me down and forced me to watch all 3 of them, and I don't know what it was. Perhaps the time or distance, or maybe I just understood storytelling better after 15 years. Oh, geez. But I really got it this time, and as a trilogy, it really told a whole saga about these characters in a fantastic way. When Toy Story 4 happened, I was a little bit confused, especially based on the satisfying ending of 3, but I watched it, and despite it kind of changing the impact and legacy of the 3rd movie, I really enjoyed it and what it had to say, because it still felt like a Toy Story movie, and it worked to drive the central theme of what Toy Story has always been about. Certainly, each movie has had its own themes, or thesis, or theses? Oh, that sounds like feces. Yuck. But the series as a whole has always been about the value and effect that our toys have on our childhood and how they shape and change us as we grow up. Throughout the 4 movies, we are given numerous examples of this through character arcs in the plot, the concept of toyhood, the use of personification, the context toys are placed in, and something called actor network theory. Oh, that was a bit of a mouthful, but with 4 amazing movies, there's bound to be some good stuff in there. And so today, I want to talk about Toy Story. The tale of Toy Story is also the tale of Pixar, and kind of Disney too. In the late 1980s, Disney animator John Lasseter became interested in computer animation and figured that this would be new ground for animated movies. He pushed and pestered for the brave little toaster to be computer animated, a tactic that annoyed the Disney executives so much that they fired him. Lasseter knew that computer animation technology was still new, but had the potential to create amazing 3-dimensional artworks, and he was not the only one to think so. Teaming up with the legendary Steve Jobs and a few other animators, they created the company Pixar, where they made a short animation about a toy. It was at this time that Disney realized that they had made a mistake firing one of their greatest animators, and were really impressed with the short CGI film that he and his team had created. Knowing they would be unable to get Lasseter back, they came to a tenuous deal where Disney would fund a full-length animated movie, which would be handled in the Pixar studio with creative control going to the Pixar staff. Except not really, because Disney was allowed to cut funding whenever they wanted, and for no reason. In its very early first form, when the film was shown to Disney executives, they cut funding on the spot, it was so terrible. But with some massive reworking from basically everyone involved and some real insight into the main character's motivations, the first Toy Story as we know it began to come together. What began as a kind of experiment that most people assumed would only get animators and graphic designers interested in the technology quickly gained favor with more people as the look, sound, and story came together. By the time the movie was released, there was a large amount of excitement from both Disney and Pixar, and the movie opened up to a roaring weekend of praise where it topped the box office for the next 2 weeks and became the highest grossing movie of 1995. Toy Story 2 was conceived fairly early after the release of the first movie, but due to its success, many of the original team were off working on other projects, things that would become A Bug's Life and Monsters Incorporated. Disney had also found some success with its dreaded gulp direct-to-home video sequels, and were interested in doing the same to Toy Story 2. Luckily, Lasseter was still attached to the film and had enough clout as a director to keep this as a theatrical release. A few years after this, Disney wanted to capitalize on the success of the first 2 movies and began putting ideas forward to create a 3rd movie. Pixar was given the right to first refusal, but due to the original agreement, the intellectual property and characters were all owned by Disney, who were already set to move forward with another studio if Pixar was out, which would have been really heartbreaking. But in 2006, Disney out and out bought all of Pixar, and instead of shafting everyone, they made the Pixar executives, which included Lasseter, the heads of all of Disney Animation. Due to his new position, Lasseter was unable to juggle his work with the directing of the third movie, but Lee Unkerk, who had been integral to the development of the first two movies, took over. For a long time after the third movie, there was no discussion or talk of continuing the story, but when the original team behind the first movie came up with a story idea, they were so excited they knew they had to do something with it. Lasseter was more involved with the direction of the fourth movie, but ultimately stepped down again, this time leaving longtime Pixar collaborator Josh Cooley in charge of the final chapter of the Toy Story. Probably. Here's your spoiler warning for all four movies in case you're missing out on one or more of them. The toys of Andy's room are excited but nervous about their child's birthday and the possibility of new toys. On top of that, the family is moving to a new home in only a few days' time. The cowboy ragdoll Woody calls a meeting to create a plan that will keep the toys abreast of any new toys Andy receives as gifts. Andy does receive a shiny new Buzz Lightyear action figure that quickly becomes his new favorite. This makes Woody envious. In a fit of jealousy, Woody plans to push Buzz behind the desk where he knows that Buzz will get stuck and be lost to Andy. But when he enacts his plan, he accidentally pushes Buzz out the window. In order to regain the trust of the other toys, Woody goes after Buzz. The pair wind up in the car but are separated from Andy. They find a way to get to Pizza Planet where they try to locate Andy but are discovered by Andy's destructive neighbor Sid. While trying to escape Sid, Buzz realizes that he is not in fact a space ranger, but just a toy. Sid then straps a rocket to Buzz with the intention of blowing him up, but when Woody and Buzz work together, they are able to escape and make their way back to the seat of Andy's car. The second movie revolves around Woody being kidnapped by a toy enthusiast who wants to sell him, along with Jessie, Bullseye, and the Prospector, as a set to a Japanese toy collector. When the rest of Andy's toys set out to rescue him, Woody must come to grips with the fact that one day Andy may grow up and no longer play with toys. Despite the Prospector's attempts to keep Woody from leaving, Woody convinces Jessie and Bullseye that being a part of Andy's childhood is the point of helping him grow up, and they all decide to go back to Andy's room. In Toy Story 3, Woody's fears have come to fruition as Andy gets ready to leave for college and his mother accidentally donates the toys to the Sunnyside Daycare Center, where under the seemingly benevolent watch of Lotso Hugging Bear, the toys are welcomed, only to realize that they're forced into staying in the younger children's room where they are abused due to the younger children's destructive tendencies. You know what toddlers are like. Yuck. After attempting to escape, the toys find themselves in the scrapyard where it looks like they're going to be melted down, but they're saved by the aliens. They then make their way back to Andy's house, where upon finding them, he realizes that they deserve to be enjoyed by someone who will love them as much as he did, and he gifts them all to his neighbor Bonnie. The fourth and final movie sees Woody babysitting a toy that Bonnie has created out of a plastic spork. This new toy that Bonnie dubs Forky continually tries to throw itself away and eventually succeeds in jumping out of a window while Bonnie and her family are on a road trip. Woody follows and attempts to rescue Forky and explain how important he is to Bonnie. On their way back to rendezvous with Bonnie's family, Woody comes across a lamp that once belonged to the toy he loved, named Bo Peep. But when he investigates, Forky is captured by a doll named Gabby Gabby, who wants to use Woody's voice box to repair her own and find a child who will love her. With the help of Bo, Woody manages to save Forky and learns that perhaps his place is no longer to be a toy to one child, but to help other toys and children everywhere bring joy to each other. In the character arcs of each movie, I don't think it's difficult to see the effects toys have on children, and vice versa. In the first movie, Woody is both the main character and primary villain. This is because he wants more than anything to make Andy happy, but gets jealous when Buzz takes his place as Andy's favorite. He forgets that his goal was to bring joy to Andy. Bo Peep even points out how sad Andy is to lose Woody, who doesn't seem to notice.
Oh, Woody. If only you could see how much Andy misses you.
In the second movie, Jessie reveals that she once had Emily, but when she grew up, Jessie was forgotten, and it takes Woody reminding her that helping kids grow up is a part of the point of being a toy. I also think that the Prospector's motivations could be interpreted as bitterness at never having been taken out of the box and played with as toys are wont to do. In the third movie, the characters deal with the fact that they might never be played with again as Andy has grown up until they find Bonnie. Lotso is the opposite and kind of mirrors Woody's character arc from the first movie as he was replaced and felt betrayed and became bitter enough to exploit this fear in others so that he could rule the daycare. Lastly, in Toy Story 4, Gabby Gabby wants to be played with and has never felt the happiness of bringing joy to a child. Although the methods she uses to get what she wants are not particularly ethical and her henchmen are, well...
He is terrifying.
Yuck. But she is just like all the other villains. They have a somewhat twisted sense of the primary goal of all toys, and that is to bring joy to a child and be loved in return through the power of play. And this is a fairly obvious through line in the series, but there are some less obvious ones that I also think are worth investigating. Toy Story has some really interesting ideas within its world design. For instance, the whole premise of the movie is that toys are alive and have autonomy, but this sort of begs the question, what the fuck are toys? I mean, when the term is thrown around colloquially, there's an understanding of what is being referred to, but I think Toy Story has some far more interesting things to say about the definition of these objects. In the broadest sense, a toy is anything that is used in the act of play and generates joy. This means that a lot of things we don't often think about as toys still count. Technically, a toy doesn't even need to be a physical entity in order to be played with, as Pokemon are considered hybrid digital toys but are still utilized in play. I did a whole video on play in Pokemon, and you should check it out. But this also includes musical instruments, sports equipment, and much more. Actually, based on the definition, any props used during sex or foreplay are technically also toys, so sex toys is an accurate descriptor. I mean, they do bring pleasure. Toy Story has a great example of this blurry definition of toydom or toyhood, and that's Forky. In the general sense, Forky is not what most people would consider a toy, and this includes himself.
I am not a toy. I'm a spork. Be quiet. I was made for soup, salad, maybe chili, and then the trash.
But because Bonnie thinks of Forky like a toy and engages in the act of play with Forky, he falls under the definition of toy. And in the universe of Toy Story, when something becomes a toy and is given meaning by their child, we see this transition as the object becomes alive. Within the movies, the toys are canonically alive, which is of course not how the real world works. At least I hope not.
We toys can see everything.
Yuck. Despite the impossibility of toys coming to life, the act of personification of toys actually helps illustrate the effect that toys can have.
How am I alive?
I don't know.
I would suggest that the best explanation for this is that Forky, and subsequently Knifey, are not actually alive, but that this is a representation of the fact that Bonnie now thinks of these regular objects as toys, and this acts as a kind of vivification. By giving the toys motivations and human-like wants and needs, we can see how toys want to be played with, and that our actions have effects on toys. This is illustrated through the story arcs that I already went over, but in the real world, toys do not have motivation at all, but it can be helpful to think about them this way because of something called thing power. Posited by Jane Bennet, not that one, the idea of thing power is that objects actually have a kind of power over people. In her essay Vibrant Matter, Bennet breaks down the ways objects have this strange ability to make people act in certain ways. Now to be clear, it's not that objects have intentionality or autonomy or come alive in any way, but simply that objects are not just things that forces act upon, but entities that affect and interact with other entities, biological or otherwise. Jane Bennet is the kind of person who would make serious distinctions between trash, stuff, objects, shit, and things. For toys, thing power is simply the compulsion that a person has to play with it. Why is it when Andy sees Buzz and Woody he wants to play with them even though they don't really interact with him? But at the beginning of the third movie, we see a universe in which the characters are played with from the perspective of the child's imagination. These objects have a kind of power over people to interact with them in a certain way. Again, toys don't have intentionality, but in terms of thing power, toys want to be played with, and children, or really just people, are compelled to play with them. It's not like these toys have a magic or curse attached to them that give them some kind of hypnotic power over children to motivate them into playing with them. Thing power is influenced by the context objects are placed in. This network or assemblage of different entities works on a macro and micro scale. Despite not actually being able to fly, as was made abundantly clear in the first movie,
This isn't flying, this is falling with style.
Andy still plays with Buzz as though he flies, and he carries Woody around as though on a horse because the design of these toys influences the object's thing power. Buzz has wings and a jetpack, which is awesome, and Woody is a cowboy who would ride a horse. The understanding of what these objects are and their meaning affects the context of how play might occur. This is what Bennet refers to as an actant. For Bonnie, Forky is a toy she plays with, but he is also understood to be a representation of the possibility and potential of what kindergarten could be. This also explains why the preschoolers at Sunnyside Daycare might not understand the context certain toys should or could be used in, or what their designs might mean. This is why their kind of play is more opportunistic and potentially destructive. This is made even more apparent with Forky. Forky is made from literal trash.
What is it with you and trash?
It's warm.
Yuck. But when put together in a particular form, he is not only personified in design, but also in autonomy. What was garbage in separate pieces became a toy when put together, and the fact that Forky comes alive means that something about this assemblage of parts makes him a toy to Bonnie, when in separate parts it was not. On a macro level, how the toys are seen in context to one another is also important. The idea of a space ranger replacing a cowboy as Andy's favorite in the first movie has this parallel sense to what happened in history and in media. Woody saving Bo Peep speaks to the idea of gender roles, which Andy would have an understanding of and probably enact out during play. In the second movie, when Woody discovers that he is part of a set with Jesse, Bullseye, and the Prospector, and is the star of his own show, he sees his own context as a toy change when he's with those particular toys. Because the way we understand toys and what they mean to us is largely based on the context of what their parts are and how they function as nodes within networks. How a toy is used is based on the networks of culture, creation, organization, and basically anything and everything around how the object or toy interacts with other bodies of matter. This is all wrapped up in the toy's thing power. This actor network theory is a different way of looking at objects and their thing power. And if you remove an object from all these networks, the toy proverbially dies. And we do have a place where this happens. We call them museums. In a museum, any object is basically removed from the other bodies and concepts and contexts that make it what it is. When Buzz tells Woody,
This is my only chance.
To do what, Woody? Watch kids from behind glass and never be loved again? Some life.
he's 100% right. If a toy isn't being played with, is it really a toy? It no longer falls under the definition of an object that brings pleasure during the act of play. It becomes an artifact removed from the various networks that make a toy have toy-like thing power. This object now has a different kind of thing power because of its new networks, but it's no longer treated like a toy. This fully explains why toys want to be played with in the movies. Even in 4, when Woody and Bo become lost toys, their motivation is to be played with and help other toys be played with by kids that come to the park. Woody's context in the networks that he is a part of have changed, and so too does his thing power. By thinking about the personification and intentionality of toys as a representation of thing power, it is easy to see that the real-world toys that these characters are stand-in for may not be alive in the same way, but do affect their owners in very real ways. Toys don't walk around when we are not looking, but to say that they are lifeless and meaningless objects would be to grossly misrepresent the value of each toy and the power and influence that they have over us, and how they shape and influence us as we grow up, or continue to do so if you still play with different kinds of toys as an adult. In the case of Toy Story, these toys are meant for children, and although Al is excited to find the toys, they really just want to be played with, and it's devastating to both toy and child when they lose each other. This is most evident when Andy leaves for college and gives Bonnie his toys. Andy's hesitation when giving up Woody due to what Woody means and the understanding that all those good memories still belong to Andy and that Bonnie can get the same joy out of playing with Woody is the exact same feeling that Woody has while watching Andy leave for college. Toys and objects have a profound impact on us, and these 4 movies really get to the core of what toys mean and why people often have a hard time letting go of them. Toys may not be alive, but they do have a tangible and important value. And that is why Toy Story really understands and imparts the value and power of toys. Here are my stray thoughts. Despite the way the 4th movie changes the meaning of the whole series, as a standalone movie, I think it's my favorite. Can we talk about how good that movie looks compared to the first one? This fucking scene right here. I really like the existential ideas around Forky coming to life. I really hope Disney decides to leave this series alone and not make more of them so they can make disgusting amounts of money while ruining childhoods like they have with other movies. Yuck. Hey, thanks so much for watching that episode. If you're interested in hearing more about my thoughts on play and toys, check out the episode I mentioned about Pokemon. Be sure to check out our other channel, The Cinecasters, for more conversations about movies, and stick around here for lots more episodes of This Is a Thing, The Long and the Short of It, and anything else we got going on right here on Cinemasters Ultimate Timeline.